The atrocities. The planet Voreth was peaceful, home to millions of innocent beings who lived simple lives. The skies were often a deep purple, and the rolling hills glowed under the soft light of its twin suns. Farmers worked the land, children played in the streets, and families gathered around for meals. Voreth was not a place of warriors or battles. It was a world of peace. But the Galactic Council saw it differently. They believed Voreth was hiding a rebel faction, one that opposed their rule. No proof was ever found, but the Council didn't care. They saw rebellion everywhere. To maintain their iron grip on the galaxy, they needed to send a message. Voreth became that message. On a quiet morning, without any warning, the Council's warships appeared in Voreth's atmosphere. The sky, once calm and serene, was torn apart by the roar of engines and the blinding light of massive ships descending from space. Panic spread across the planet like wildfire. People rushed from their homes, eyes wide with fear as the shadow of the warships covered their cities. The Council's soldiers landed next, their cold metal armor gleaming under the sun, their weapons drawn. They marched through the streets, breaking down doors, pulling innocent civilians from their homes. Screams echoed in every corner of the cities, but there was no mercy. The soldiers had their orders: wipe out every last one. Old and young, men and women, no one was spared. The soldiers moved like machines, their eyes blank, their hearts cold. They didn't see the faces of the people they slaughtered. They only saw their orders. In a matter of hours, entire cities were reduced to ruins. The streets were littered with bodies, and the once vibrant fields of Voreth were now stained red with blood. Amira, a young girl barely into her teenage years, hid with her younger brother in the basement of their home. Their parents had been taken by the soldiers, dragged out in front of them before they could even say goodbye. Amira held her brother tightly, her heart pounding in her chest, trying to keep him quiet as the sounds of footsteps and gunfire echoed above them. She whispered to him, telling him stories of distant stars and adventures in space, trying to keep his mind off the horrors happening just outside. But she knew, deep down, that there was little hope. The soldiers were thorough. They would find them eventually. As the hours passed, the noise began to fade. The footsteps grew distant, and the gunfire stopped. Amira slowly crept up the stairs, her brother clutching her hand. She opened the door a crack and peeked out. The streets were silent, but the silence was more terrifying than the noise. Everything was destroyed. They stepped outside, and the sight before them nearly broke Amira. Their city, once full of life, was now a graveyard. Bodies lay scattered everywhere. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and fires burned in the distance. The air smelled of smoke and death. Amira's heart ached, and tears streamed down her face, but she couldn't cry. Not now. She had to be strong for her brother. They walked through the ruins, looking for any sign of life, but there was none. It was as if the entire planet had been wiped clean of its people in a single day. The Council had done what they came to do. Voreth was dead. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, the news of the massacre began to spread. Whispers of what the Council had done reached the ears of many, but few dared to speak out. The Council was too powerful, too ruthless. Most feared them too much to even question their actions. But on Earth, humanity reacted differently. Humanity had always been outsiders in the galactic community, kept at arm's length by the Council and other alien races. They were seen as unpredictable, too passionate, and too dangerous to be trusted with galactic politics. But when humanity learned of the massacre on Voreth, their leaders were horrified. The images of innocent civilians lying dead in the streets, of children taken from their families, of entire cities reduced to ash, it ignited a fire within them. They couldn't stand by and do nothing. Humanity had a long history of fighting for what they believed was right, of standing up for the oppressed, even when it wasn't their fight. The massacre on Voreth was a crime that could not be ignored. Human leaders gathered in secret meetings, discussing what could be done. Many argued that humanity should remain neutral, that the Council was too powerful to challenge. But others, driven by a deep sense of justice, argued that they couldn't turn a blind eye to such evil. To do nothing would make them complicit. In the end, humanity made a decision that would change the course of history. They would not stand by. They would act. The massacre on Voreth would not be forgotten, and the Galactic Council would soon learn the true meaning of wrath. You said, the call to action. The massacre on Voreth reverberated through human society like a shockwave. News broadcasts and videos of the devastation played across every screen, showing the ruined cities and lifeless bodies. People watched in horror as they learned about the Galactic Council's brutal actions. But horror quickly turned into anger. In the streets of every human colony, from the crowded urban centers of Earth to the distant mining outposts on Mars and beyond, people began to gather. They held candles for the lost, chanted for justice, and demanded action. The public outcry was enormous, and the pressure on the human government grew with every passing hour. Within days, human leaders convened a special meeting in a secure underground facility deep within Earth's capital city. The air was tense as military generals, political leaders, and advisors from every human colony gathered around a large table, each of them knowing that the decision they were about to make could change the fate of the entire galaxy. President Alina Markov stood at the head of the table, her face stern and resolute. She had been a calm and collected leader during her years in office, guiding humanity through diplomatic challenges and maintaining peace with the other species of the galaxy. But this time was different. The massacre on Voreth had shaken her deeply. She looked around at the others in the room, each of them waiting for her to speak. Taking a deep breath, she began. We've all seen the footage. We know what the Galactic Council has done. Innocent lives were taken, men, women, and children slaughtered for no reason other than to send a message of fear. The question before us now is simple. What will humanity do in response? General Rourke, the highest-ranking officer of Earth's military forces, was the first to speak. He slammed his fist on the table, his eyes burning with fury. We cannot let this stand. If we do nothing, the Council will continue to trample over anyone who dares oppose them. They've made it clear that they have no regard for life, and that makes them our enemy. We need to strike back. Several nods of agreement came from around the table. The room was filled with a sense of urgency, a need to act. But not everyone was so eager. Minister of Diplomacy Sarah Greaves raised her hand, her voice calm but firm. I understand the anger, and believe me, I share it. But we must be cautious. The Council controls vast military resources, far beyond anything we've faced before. A direct attack could provoke a war that we might not win. A murmur of concern spread through the room. Humanity, though technologically advanced and militarily capable, was still a relatively young player on the galactic stage. The Galactic Council had been in power for centuries, their fleets spanning countless worlds. Engaging them in open conflict would be risky, to say the least. President Markov listened carefully to both sides, weighing the options in her mind. She knew that humanity could not afford to appear weak, but she also understood the dangers of recklessness. After several moments of silence, she spoke again. We will not stand by and let the Council commit atrocities without consequence, but we will also not charge headfirst into a war we're unprepared for. Our response must be strategic, precise, and above all, just. The Council needs to be held accountable, but we must do it in a way that rallies the galaxy to our side. There was a pause as everyone considered her words. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. Then, General Rourke nodded slowly. What do you propose, Madam President? Markov looked across the room, her eyes determined. We'll gather evidence of the Council's crimes and broadcast it across the galaxy. We'll expose their actions to every species, every government, and every world. And when the time is right, we'll strike at their power where it hurts the most. But we won't do it alone. The plan began to take shape. Humanity would use its extensive network of spies and diplomats to gather irrefutable proof of the Council's involvement in the Vorath massacre. Then, they would begin reaching out to other species who had suffered under the Council's rule, quietly building alliances and gathering support. This would not be a war of brute force, but one of strategy and unity. Weeks passed as the plan was put into action. Evidence of the Council's atrocities was compiled, showing not only the massacre on Vorath, but a long history of similar actions against other peaceful worlds. This information was distributed in secret to key leaders across the galaxy, many of whom had long resented the Council's oppressive rule, but had been too afraid to act. Human ambassadors traveled from world to world, seeking out potential allies. Many alien leaders were skeptical at first, unsure if humanity could be trusted or if they were strong enough to stand against the Council. But as more and more evidence came to light, the tide began to turn. Small but powerful coalitions began to form in the shadows, each of them preparing for the day when the Council's reign would finally be challenged. Meanwhile, humanity's military forces quietly mobilized, preparing for the inevitable conflict. Fleets of warships were upgraded with the latest technology, and new strategies were developed that would allow them to outmaneuver the Council's larger forces. The soldiers trained day and night, readying themselves for the battles to come. And so, as the galaxy watched in silence, the seeds of rebellion were planted. The Galactic Council, once thought invincible, now faced a growing threat. And at the heart of it all, humanity stood ready, their fury simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when they would strike back. The atrocities committed on Vorath had not been forgotten. They had become a rallying cry for justice, a call to action that would soon echo across the stars. The alliance forms. The whispers of resistance grew louder across the galaxy. Species once divided by politics and history now found common ground in their shared fear and hatred of the Galactic Council's tyranny. News of the Vorath massacre had sparked outrage, but it was humanity's call to action that gave it direction. On a hidden space station orbiting a dying star, representatives from various species gathered. The atmosphere was tense, filled with uncertainty but also hope. This was the first time so many different alien civilizations had come together to discuss a united front against the Galactic Council. Some were longtime enemies, others had never even spoken to one another, but all understood the stakes. Human diplomats led the charge, their words carrying weight after the efforts they had made to spread the truth. The atrocities committed by the Council had touched many worlds, and now these worlds were looking to humanity for leadership. General Rourke stood at the front of the large meeting hall, flanked by President Elena Markov and several other high-ranking officials. The hall was crowded with alien representatives, each with their own unique appearance, many looking weary from the long years of suppression under the Council's rule. But today, there was something different in the air, a sense of unity, as though hope had been reignited across the stars. Rourke's voice boomed through the room, his passion evident in every word. "We all know why we're here," he began, scanning the room with steely eyes. "The Galactic Council has oppressed us for too long. They believe they can rule through fear, that they can massacre innocent lives without facing consequences. But they are wrong. Today we stand together, human and alien alike, to say no more." A murmur of agreement spread through the hall, and Markov stepped forward. Her tone was softer, but just as resolute. "This is not just about vengeance," she said. "It's about justice. It's about creating a galaxy where all species can live freely, without the shadow of fear looming over them. But to do this, we must work together. The Council is powerful, but they are not invincible. If we unite our strength, we can bring them down." There were nods from various alien leaders, though some still hesitated. One of the most prominent voices in the room belonged to High Chancellor Varric of the Tellara, a tall, imposing alien with dark purple skin and sharp features. His species had suffered greatly under the Council's rule, their once prosperous homeworld reduced to a barren wasteland. Varric rose from his seat, his voice low and gravelly. "The Tellara have no love for the Council. We've bled under their control for centuries, but many of us have tried to rise against them before, only to be crushed. What makes this time different? Why should we believe that humanity, a relatively young species, can lead us to victory where others have failed? There was a brief silence as the room waited for Markov's response. She remained calm, meeting Varick's gaze with unwavering confidence. "Because we will not fight alone," she replied. "Humanity has its flaws, but one thing we excel at is adaptation. We've studied the Council's tactics. We've prepared ourselves for their overwhelming numbers and advanced technology. But most importantly, we've reached out to you, to all of you, because we believe that together we can be stronger than the Council ever anticipated." She paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in. Then she continued, "We've already begun gathering intelligence on the Council's weak points. Their corruption has made them complacent, and they've underestimated the power of unity. We will strike them not only with force but with strategy, targeting their supply chains, their communications, and their leadership. This will not be a war of numbers, but one of precision. Together, we can turn the tide." More nods followed, and the mood in the room shifted. The idea of victory no longer seemed like a distant dream, but a tangible possibility. Another alien leader, Commander Zevak of the Malran, a species of amphibious beings with shimmering blue skin, spoke up next. "We have watched humanity's rise with curiosity," Zevak said, his voice carrying a melodic tone. "You've proven resourceful and determined. The Malran people will join this alliance. But we must act swiftly. The Council will not stand idly by once they catch wind of our plans." Rourke and Markov exchanged a brief glance, then turned back to the room. "Agreed," Rourke said firmly. "We need to move quickly. The Council is powerful, but they rely on their control over communication and trade. If we disrupt their ability to coordinate their forces, we can weaken them significantly." As the talks continued, more and more species pledged their support. Some offered military forces, while others promised to provide intelligence, resources, or safe havens for the growing rebellion. Every contribution, no matter how small, would be crucial in the coming conflict. By the end of the meeting, the alliance had been formed. It was a fragile coalition, held together by mutual necessity and a shared hatred for the Council, but it was also a beacon of hope. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy stood on the brink of real change. As the alien representatives began to depart, General Rourke and President Markov remained behind, discussing the next steps with their closest advisors. There was still much to do, plans to finalize, forces to mobilize, and allies to support. But for the first time since the massacre on Vorith, it felt like progress was being made. Outside the space station, in the cold void of space, humanity's warships drifted silently in the darkness, ready for the battles to come. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see if this alliance would succeed, or if the Council's tyranny would continue unchallenged. But one thing was certain: humanity would not back down. They had seen the horrors of the Council's rule, and they would fight with every ounce of strength they had to end it. The alliance was their best hope, and the Council's worst nightmare. The first strike. The galaxy trembled as news of the newly formed alliance spread across the stars. Whispers of rebellion reached even the farthest edges of the Galactic Council's domain, and the Council's leadership scrambled to maintain their iron grip. Yet, while the Council debated how to quash the uprising, the alliance, led by humanity, prepared for their first decisive move. Hidden deep within a nebula, far from the prying eyes of the Council, the alliance gathered their forces. Massive human warships floated alongside a diverse array of alien vessels, each species contributing their best ships and soldiers to the cause. The alliance was outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Council lacked: unity and determination. General Rourke stood on the bridge of the Hercules, humanity's flagship, watching the fleet assemble before him. He had been in countless battles, but this one felt different. This wasn't just about winning territory or protecting Earth. This was about toppling a corrupt regime and freeing billions from its cruel rule. Status report. Rourke barked to his officers. "All ships are in position, sir," replied Commander Lin, his second in command. "The fleet is ready to strike at your command." Rourke nodded, his mind racing as he considered the plan. Their first target was a crucial one: the Council's primary communication hub, located on a heavily fortified space station orbiting the planet Ilaris. If they could disable or destroy it, they would cripple the Council's ability to coordinate their forces, throwing the galaxy into chaos and giving the Alliance a much-needed advantage. The plan was risky, but it had been carefully crafted. Human and alien intelligence agencies had worked together to pinpoint the station's weak points. It wouldn't be an easy fight, but if they could pull it off, the tide of the war would begin to turn in their favor. "All ships, this is General Rourke," he announced, his voice echoing through the fleet's communication channels. "We've trained for this moment, and now it's time to act. The Council believes they are untouchable, that they can rule through fear and intimidation. Today, we prove them wrong. Remember, we are not just fighting for ourselves, but for every innocent life crushed under the Council's boot. Let's show them what a united galaxy can do. Prepare for battle." A chorus of affirmations came from the other ships, and the fleet began to move into attack formation. The vast nebula surrounding them provided cover, masking their approach to the station. As they closed in, the tension on the Hercules bridge was palpable. Everyone knew that the success of the mission would determine the course of the war. "Commander Lin, initiate the countdown," Rourke ordered. "Aye, sir," Lin replied, tapping a series of buttons on his console. "All units, prepare for launch in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engage." With a flash, the Alliance fleet surged forward, breaking through the edge of the nebula and revealing themselves to the Council forces guarding the communication station. The battle began immediately, with both sides unleashing a barrage of energy blasts, missiles, and laser fire. The quiet void of space was suddenly alive with explosions and streaks of light. The Council's defenses were formidable. Their fleet was composed of heavily armored ships, each bristling with weapons, and their station was protected by powerful energy shields. But the Alliance was well prepared. Human and alien ships coordinated their movements with precision, using their diverse strengths to exploit the weaknesses of their enemies. The Hercules led the charge, its massive cannons tearing through the Council's smaller vessels. Alien fighters zipped between the larger ships, distracting the Council's gunners and drawing fire away from the Alliance's capital ships. Meanwhile, a group of specialized alien ships equipped with advanced cloaking technologies slipped past the enemy lines, heading straight for the station's shield generators. On the bridge, Rourke watched the battle unfold, his eyes sharp and focused. "Get those fighters to cover our bombers," he commanded. "We need to hit those shield generators hard." "Bombers are on their way, sir," Lin confirmed. "The cloaked ships are in position." Moments later, a series of explosions erupted on the surface of the station as the cloaked ships unleashed their payloads. The shield generators flickered and then failed, leaving the station vulnerable. This was the moment they had been waiting for. "Now, all ships, concentrate fire on the station," Rourke ordered. The Alliance fleet unleashed a devastating volley of firepower, and the station began to buckle under the onslaught. Fires erupted across its surface, and pieces of debris drifted into space as its structure started to collapse. The Council's forces fought desperately to defend it, but they were overwhelmed by the Alliance's coordinated assault. Within minutes, the station was crippled. Its communication systems went dark, and the last of its defenders were either destroyed or forced to retreat. The Alliance had won the battle, and the Council's most critical asset had been taken down. Cheers erupted across the fleet as the realization of their victory sank in. On the Hercules bridge, Rourke allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. They had done it. The first strike against the Council had been a success, but he knew the war was far from over. "Good work, everyone," Rourke said, his voice steady despite the thrill of victory. But don't get complacent. The Council will retaliate, and we need to be ready for whatever they throw at us. For now, let's regroup and prepare for the next phase. The fleet began to pull back, leaving the shattered remains of the station behind. As they retreated into the safety of the nebula, Rourke couldn't help but feel a surge of pride for the brave men, women, and aliens who had fought alongside him. The first battle had been won, but the war for the galaxy's future had only just begun. The Alliance had shown its strength, but now they would need to maintain that momentum and strike even harder at the heart of the Council's power. The fight for freedom continued, and Rourke knew that humanity and its allies were ready for whatever came next. Humanity's fury unleashed. The news of the Alliance's victory at the communication station spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Billions of beings, from the core worlds to the outer fringes, heard of the Council's first defeat at the hands of humanity and its allies. The morale of the oppressed species soared, while fear and panic began to grip the hearts of the Council's leadership. But what the Council feared the most was still to come: humanity's fury, unleashed in full force. On Earth, preparations for the next phase of the war were in full swing. Factories worked around the clock to produce weapons, ships, and supplies for the Alliance. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers, eager to join the fight. Humanity, having suffered the loss of countless innocent lives due to the Council's atrocities, was determined to ensure that such tragedies would never happen again. In a high-tech command center deep beneath the surface of Earth, General Rourke stood before a massive holographic map of the galaxy. His face was stern, his eyes focused. Around him were the leaders of the other species in the Alliance, brilliant strategists, seasoned warriors, and wise diplomats. Together, they were planning the next move in their campaign to dismantle the Council's oppressive regime. "We've struck a blow," Rourke said, his voice calm yet commanding. "But we can't stop now. The Council will retaliate soon, and when they do, it will be with overwhelming force. We need to hit them where it hurts before they have a chance to regroup." An alien leader, an elder from the peaceful Aurelians, spoke up. "We have intercepted intelligence that the Council is massing its fleet at the stronghold of Carathax. It's one of their most heavily fortified planets, and if we could take it, the Council's military capabilities would be severely crippled." Rourke nodded thoughtfully. Carathax is a fortress world, protected by planetary shields and defended by a massive fleet. It won't be an easy target, but if we can destroy their fleet there, we'll force the Council onto the defensive. They'll have no choice but to retreat from many of their occupied worlds. Another leader, this one a fierce warrior from the Tarkin race, leaned forward. "Our people have suffered for generations under the Council's rule. We are ready to fight, to give everything to see their empire crumble. What do you propose, General?" Rourke turned back to the holographic map, highlighting the strategic points around Carathax. "Here's the plan. We will launch a multi-pronged attack. The main fleet, led by human warships, will engage the Council's forces head-on. Meanwhile, smaller, specialized strike teams will infiltrate the planet's defenses. Their mission will be to disable the planetary shields, allowing our fleet to bombard the surface and take out their key military installations." The room buzzed with activity as the leaders discussed the details of the plan. Rourke could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but he knew this was the only way to bring the Council to its knees. A few days later, the Alliance fleet set out for Carathax. The journey was tense, with every member of the fleet knowing that they were heading into the most dangerous battle of the war so far. But they also knew that this was their chance to deal a decisive blow to the Council. As they neared the fortress world, Rourke addressed his troops one last time. "Soldiers of the Alliance," he began, his voice echoing through the comms. "You are about to face one of the greatest challenges of your lives. The Council will throw everything they have at us to defend Carathax, but we will not falter. Remember why we fight. We fight for those who can't. We fight for justice, for freedom, and for the future of the galaxy. Today, We show the Council the true strength of humanity and its allies. Fight with honor, fight with courage, and together we will emerge victorious. As Work's words resonated through the fleet, the ships powered up their weapons and prepared for battle. The massive fleet of the Council was waiting for them, an intimidating wall of firepower and armor. But the Alliance was undeterred. This was their moment. The battle began with a massive exchange of fire, explosions lighting up the void of space as ships clashed in a chaotic dance of destruction. Human warships, reinforced with alien technology, led the charge, their advanced weapons cutting through the Council's defenses. Fighters from all species zipped between the capital ships, dodging enemy fire and returning it with deadly accuracy. Meanwhile, the infiltration teams made their move. Cloaked ships slipped past the Council's defensive lines and descended toward the planet's surface. Elite squads, made up of the best soldiers from across the Alliance, landed near the shield generators. Their mission was simple but incredibly dangerous: disable the generators at any cost. On the surface, fierce firefights erupted as the squads fought their way through the Council's troops. The battle was intense, with every step forward costing lives. But the Alliance soldiers were relentless. Driven by a deep sense of justice and the memories of those lost to the Council's cruelty, they pushed forward until they finally reached the shield generators. With explosions echoing in the background, a team of human engineers worked frantically to plant charges on the generators. Time was running out. The fleet in space was holding its own, but they couldn't withstand the Council's numbers forever. Finally, the charges were set, and the team retreated just in time to avoid the massive blast that followed. The planetary shields collapsed, leaving Carthax vulnerable. Above, Rourke's fleet seized the opportunity. The Alliance warships unleashed their full firepower, bombarding the Council's military installations on the surface. The once impenetrable fortress world was being torn apart. The tide of battle shifted, and soon the Council's fleet began to falter. One by one, their ships were destroyed or forced to retreat. The Alliance had won the day, and Carthax was theirs. As the dust settled, the Alliance forces regrouped. They had taken a major step toward defeating the Council, but Rourke knew that the war was far from over. The Council would not give up so easily, and more challenges lay ahead. But for now, they had struck a decisive blow. In the heart of the Alliance fleet, aboard the Hercules, Rourke stood tall, looking out at the stars. Humanity's fury had been unleashed, and the Council's days were numbered. The fight for the galaxy continued, and the Alliance was ready for whatever came next. The Council's retaliation. The destruction of Carthax sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. News of the Alliance's victory over one of the Galactic Council's most formidable strongholds emboldened oppressed worlds. Uprisings erupted on several Council-controlled planets, fueled by the hope that freedom was within reach. But while the Alliance celebrated, the Council plotted its retaliation in silence. In the grand halls of the Galactic Council's central hub, the atmosphere was tense. The once confident leaders of the galaxy's most powerful government were now shaken by their losses. The defeat at Carthax had not only dented their military might, but also shattered the illusion of invincibility they had cultivated for centuries. The Council's members, a mix of the galaxy's oldest and most influential species, gathered in an emergency session. Councillor Theros, an imposing figure from the dominant Serani species, addressed the assembly with cold fury. "We underestimated these humans. Their tenacity and their unpredictable tactics have cost us dearly. This alliance they forged with lesser species is a direct threat to our rule. We cannot allow them to continue." Across the chamber, murmurs of agreement echoed. The Council had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist for millennia, quashing rebellions and dissent with swift, brutal force. But the humans were different. Their resistance had been unexpected, their victories impossible to ignore. The Alliance had shaken the very foundations of the Council's authority. "We must make an example of them," Theros continued, his voice filled with venom. "If we allow the humans to keep pushing forward, others will believe they can rise against us too. We need to strike back, and we need to do it in a way that will break them once and for all. The counselors debated their next move. Some called for a swift and overwhelming military response, sending their entire fleet to crush the Alliance in one decisive blow. Others suggested a more insidious approach, targeting Earth itself with covert operations to demoralize humanity from within. Eventually, a plan was agreed upon. The Council would retaliate with a show of force so devastating that it would send a clear message to every corner of the galaxy: defy the Council, and you will be annihilated. They would attack Earth directly, but not with the same tactics they had employed before. This time, they would utilize their most feared and deadly weapons, planetary razors. Planetary razors were ancient machines designed long ago by a race of beings who had mastered the science of planetary destruction. The Council had kept them hidden for centuries, using them only in the most extreme cases. A single razor had the power to render an entire planet uninhabitable, reducing it to a barren wasteland in a matter of hours. The Council had always considered the use of razors a last resort, but now, in their desperation, they were willing to unleash them on Earth. The orders were given, and the Council's war machine roared back to life. Fleets of warships gathered around the central hub, prepared to carry out the devastating mission. As they made their final preparations, Counselor Theros watched from the command center, a sinister smile on his face. "Let them see what happens when they challenge us," he whispered to himself. Back on Earth, the Alliance was unaware of the impending danger. They were focused on consolidating their victory, securing Carthax, and planning their next move. General Rourke, now hailed as a hero across the galaxy, remained vigilant. He knew the Council would retaliate, but he had no idea just how severe their response would be. As the Alliance leaders met to discuss their next target, a sudden and urgent transmission came through from their intelligence network. A fleet of Council warships had been spotted moving through hyperspace, heading directly toward Earth. At first, the Alliance believed it to be a standard retaliation fleet, but then the intelligence officers revealed something far more alarming. The fleet was escorting multiple planetary razors. The room fell silent as the implications of this information sank in. The Council was planning to obliterate Earth, to wipe out humanity in one swift, horrific strike. Rourke felt a surge of anger and fear at the thought of his home planet being destroyed. He slammed his fist down on the table. "We have to stop them," he said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "If those razors reach Earth, it's all over." The Alliance leaders quickly began devising a plan. They had no choice but to intercept the Council fleet before it reached Earth. But the planetary razors were heavily guarded, and time was running out. The fleet would arrive in days, maybe less. The Alliance's most powerful warships were immediately dispatched to intercept the Council's armada. It was a desperate move, but there was no alternative. Rourke knew the stakes. If they failed, Earth would be lost, and the Alliance would crumble. As the Alliance fleet raced toward the Council's forces, tension mounted across the galaxy. Citizens of Earth were evacuated to bunkers and underground shelters, hoping they would be safe from the devastation that might come. Across countless worlds, people watched and waited, knowing that this battle could decide the fate of the entire galaxy. In the cold depths of space, the two fleets finally met. The Council's armada, sleek and menacing, formed an impenetrable wall around the deadly razors. The Alliance forces, outnumbered but determined, prepared for the fight of their lives. The battle began with a flurry of lasers, missiles, and explosions. Alliance fighters darted between Council ships, trying to break through their defenses. Larger capital ships engaged in direct combat, exchanging devastating volleys of firepower. But despite their best efforts, the Alliance fleet couldn't break through the Council's defensive line. The razors remained protected, slowly making their way toward Earth. As the battle raged on, Rourke knew they were running out of time. Desperation gripped him as he realized that unless they found a way to disable the razors, Earth was doomed. "We need a miracle," Rourke muttered, watching the unfolding chaos on his command screen. But miracles were hard to come by in war, and the fate of humanity now hung in the balance. Humanity's last stand. The space above Earth was a scene of chaos and destruction. The Alliance fleet struggled to hold the line, with waves of Council warships continuing their relentless assault. Planetary razors, the terrifying engines of annihilation, inched ever closer to Earth. Despite the Alliance's best efforts, the Council's retaliation seemed unstoppable. On board the lead Alliance ship, General Rourke surveyed the battle with grim determination. He knew they were outnumbered, and that time was running out. Earth's very existence hung in the balance. But despite the odds, surrender was not an option. Humanity had been backed into a corner before, and every time, they had found a way to survive. All ships, focus fire on the razors. Rourke ordered, his voice echoing through the command deck. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair tightly. We can't let them reach Earth. The Alliance fleet shifted its strategy. Fighters and bombers broke off from engaging enemy warships and began targeting the massive planetary razors. They dove through fields of laser fire and missile flak, risking everything to make a dent in the razors' heavily armored hulls. But the Council had anticipated this. Their warships redoubled their efforts to protect the razors, intercepting the Alliance forces with brutal efficiency. The air was thick with tension, every second bringing the Council's deadly machines closer to Earth. We're not going to make it, one of Rourke's officers said quietly, fear creeping into his voice. Rourke didn't respond immediately. He knew the officer was right. The planetary razors were designed to be nearly indestructible, and the Alliance's weapons were struggling to penetrate their shields. The razors would soon be in position to unleash their full power, reducing Earth to a barren wasteland. Then, a new voice broke through the tension. Commander Elena Drayton, one of the Alliance's most skilled tacticians, appeared on the communications screen. I have an idea, Drayton said. It's risky, but it might be our only shot. Rourke listened carefully as Drayton laid out her plan. The Alliance's remaining ships would initiate a diversionary attack on the Council's forward fleet, drawing their forces away from the razors. Meanwhile, a small elite strike team would use cloaked ships to sneak past the Council's defenses and attempt a boarding operation on the razors themselves. If they could infiltrate the razors, they could plant explosives or disable their power cores from within. It's a suicide mission, Rourke said bluntly. But it's better than sitting here waiting for Earth to be destroyed. With little time left, the plan was put into action. The Alliance's capital ships surged forward, engaging the Council's warships with renewed vigor. The fighting was fierce, with losses mounting on both sides. But the diversion worked. Many of the Council's ships shifted their focus to the new threat, leaving a small opening for the strike team. Drayton led the strike team herself. Using a prototype stealth ship, her team weaved through the chaos of the battle, avoiding detection by the Council's sensors. The massive forms of the planetary razors loomed ahead, dark and ominous against the backdrop of stars. The stealth ship landed undetected on the surface of the nearest razor. Drayton and her team quickly disembarked, making their way toward the control center of the colossal machine. The inside of the razor was a maze of corridors and massive machinery, with the team moving quickly and quietly to avoid being discovered by the Council's security forces. As they approached the razor's power core, alarms suddenly blared to life. The Council's security forces had detected their presence. Drayton cursed under her breath. Move. We're running out of time. The team fought their way through the razor's corridors, exchanging fire with Council soldiers. The air was thick with tension and the sound of blaster fire as they reached the power core. Drayton quickly set the charges, the explosives ready to detonate at a moment's notice. Charges set, Drayton said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Let's get out of here. The team began their retreat, but the Council's forces were closing in fast. Drayton knew they wouldn't all make it out, but as long as the charges detonated, they could still save Earth. Back in the command center, Rourke watched as the strike team fought their way out of the razor. His heart pounded in his chest. They were so close. If Drayton could detonate the charges, Earth might be saved. "Commander, we need those charges detonated now." Rourke barked into the comms, his voice filled with urgency. Drayton heard him loud and clear. As her team reached the stealth ship, she hesitated for just a moment before making the ultimate decision. She stayed behind, covering her team's retreat as they boarded the ship. As the stealth ship took off, Drayton detonated the charges. A massive explosion rocked the planetary Razor. The power core went critical, and within seconds, the Razor was engulfed in a fiery inferno. The destruction of the Razor sent shockwaves through the Council's fleet, momentarily throwing their forces into disarray. "One Razor down," Rourke said, his voice thick with emotion. "But we've still got 2 more to go." The Alliance fleet continued its desperate battle, pushing forward with everything they had. Drayton's sacrifice had bought them precious time, but the remaining Razors were still advancing. With Earth hanging in the balance, Rourke knew they had no choice but to keep fighting until the bitter end. As the battle raged on, hope flickered in the hearts of humanity and their allies. They had taken down 1 Razor. Maybe, just maybe, they could stop the others too. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested on what happened next.